The moment I walked through that front door carrying my famous BBQ ribs, my daughter-in-law's voice hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. "I told you already, I don't want this old construction worker here." There she was, standing in the marble foyer of the house I bought, screaming about the man who paid for every square foot of it. My name's Harold Peterson, 58 years old, owner of Peterson Construction and Property Management. What this spoiled princess didn't know was that every luxury item she touched, every designer outfit she wore, every spa treatment she enjoyed, it all came from the calloused hands of this old construction worker. The afternoon sun was beating down on the perfectly manicured lawn as I stood there holding that heavy platter. Inside were my signature BBQ ribs with homemade sauce, the same recipe my late wife Sarah had perfected back when we were newlyweds living in a trailer behind my first job site. Bradley had been asking for these ribs since he was 10 years old, back when he'd sit on paint buckets watching me work late into the night, asking a million questions about every tool in my belt. I was 5 minutes early for our Sunday family dinner, just like always. In construction, you show up on time or you don't show up at all. My father taught me that when I was 16, working summers on his crew before he lost the business to a heart attack. That's when I learned the first rule of survival. If you want something done right, you do it yourself. For 30 years, I've built this business from nothing. Started with a beat-up Ford pickup and a toolbox Sarah bought me for Christmas with money she'd saved from waitressing double shifts. Worked through rain, snow, 100-degree summers, building houses, commercial buildings, and a reputation that meant something in this town. I wasn't some pencil pusher in a suit. I was a man who built things with his hands, who employed 25 good people, who owned 4 rental properties because I knew the value of hard work and smart investments. Just this morning, I'd been out at the Riverside Shopping Center renovation, a $1.4 million contract that had taken me 6 months to land. Standing in my hard hat and steel-toed boots, watching my crew install the new storefront systems, I felt the same pride I'd felt on my first job 30 years ago. These weren't just buildings, they were legacy. Every beam we raised, every foundation we poured, every system we installed would be serving families and businesses for decades to come. My foreman, Danny, had walked up to me around 10 a.m. with the progress report. "We're ahead of schedule, boss," he'd said, adjusting his safety glasses against the morning glare. "Should have this phase wrapped by Thursday." Good work, I'd told him, meaning it. Danny had been with Peterson Construction for 12 years, ever since I'd hired him fresh out of trade school. Now he was training the next generation, passing on the skills and work ethic that built everything worthwhile in this world. But standing in that doorway, listening to Stephanie's venomous voice echoing from the living room, I felt like nothing. Like some charity case they tolerated out of obligation. Like the success I'd built with my own hands didn't matter because it involved getting dirty. "I can't stand him, Bradley." Her shrill voice continued from inside, always showing up in those work clothes, talking about construction projects like anyone cares. "I just want one peaceful Sunday without smelling sawdust and listening to blue-collar stories. Blue-collar stories." She said it like they were fairy tales instead of real achievements. Last month, those blue-collar stories had included finishing the new elementary school gymnasium 2 weeks early and $50,000 under budget. But I guess helping kids have a safe place to play wasn't intellectual enough for Mrs. High and Mighty. I waited for my son's voice, waited for him to say something like, "Hey, that's my father you're talking about, the man who put me through college and bought us this house." But what I heard made my blood run cold. "Keep your voice down, honey. Dad's coming, it's just dinner. Try to get through it." That weak, pleading tone from the same boy I'd taught to swing a hammer, who I'd put through college debt-free, who I'd made project manager at my own company. The same son I'd bought this $450,000 house for because Stephanie deserved to live somewhere respectable. I remembered the day Bradley graduated from state with his business degree. Sarah and I had been so proud, sitting in those uncomfortable plastic chairs, watching our boy walk across that stage. She'd squeezed my hand and whispered, "You did it, Harold. You gave him opportunities we never had." 3 months later, Sarah was gone, massive stroke at 52. Probably brought on by years of stress from those early lean years when we lived on ramen noodles and determination. I'd thrown myself into work after that, building the business bigger and stronger, partly to honor her memory and partly to ensure Bradley would never struggle like we had. But standing there, listening to him choose his wife's comfort over his father's dignity, I wondered if I'd done him any favors at all. I straightened my shoulders and walked in anyway. 30 years of dealing with difficult clients and demanding contractors had taught me to keep my composure when everything inside wanted to explode. I pushed open the door with my practice business smile, the same one I used when property inspectors tried to nitpick my work or when city planners questioned my permits. "Afternoon, folks," I said, setting the platter down on their glass dining table. Hot as blazes out there, but I brought Bradley's favorite. The living room looked like something out of a magazine. White leather furniture, abstract paintings hanging at precise angles, crystal chandelier hanging over the dining area like some kind of crown jewel. All paid for by Peterson construction profits. All of it existing because I'd gotten up at 5 a.m. every day for 3 decades, because I'd bid jobs smart and delivered them on time. I'd installed that chandelier myself, actually. Spent 4 hours making sure the ceiling box could handle the weight, running new electrical to support the dimmer system Stephanie had insisted on. She'd stood there the whole time, criticizing the dust from the drywall work, acting like I was some handyman she'd hired off Craigslist instead of the man paying for her designer lifestyle. Stephanie stood there in a $300 designer dress. I knew because I'd seen the credit card statement when I reviewed the monthly expenses. Her arms were crossed, giving me a look like I'd tracked mud across her precious marble floors. The same floors I'd personally selected and supervised the installation of, working with the contractor to get the pattern exactly right. When she saw me, her face twisted into that fake smile she reserved for people she considered beneath her social status. It was the same expression she used with the landscaping crew, the house cleaners, anyone whose hands got dirty for a living. "Oh, Harold," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "What a surprise. You look so tired. Maybe you should take some time off from all that manual labor." Manual labor. She said it like it was a disease, like there was something shameful about building things that mattered. I thought about the elementary school gym my crew had just finished, where hundreds of kids would play basketball and learn teamwork for the next 50 years. I thought about the medical office complex we'd completed last spring, where doctors were already saving lives in spaces my team had created. "Not tired at all," I replied, hanging up my work jacket on the coat rack I'd installed myself. The same coat rack Stephanie had picked out from some high-end catalog, charging it to the company credit card, like everything else in her world. "Just finished inspecting the Riverside project. Shopping center renovation. Good honest work." I watched her wince at the words honest work like I'd cursed in church. Bradley emerged from the kitchen, looking uncomfortable in his pressed slacks and polo shirt. He'd changed clothes after getting home from the office. I noticed. Heaven forbid anyone see him in actual work attire. "Hey, Dad," he said, giving me a quick, awkward hug. "Thanks for bringing the ribs. I was just telling Stephanie about that new office park project you're bidding on." Office park. Not the affordable housing development. I was actually pursuing a project that would provide decent homes for young families just starting out. The kind of family Sarah and I had been 30 years ago. But I guess affordable housing wasn't prestigious enough to mention at Stephanie's dinner parties. We sat down to eat, and the tension was thick enough to cut with a circular saw. Stephanie poured water with sharp, jerky movements, probably wishing it was poison. I looked around at the dining room, hardwood floors I'd personally recommended and helped install, crown molding I'd supervised, electrical work my guys had done at cost because it was for family. The irony wasn't lost on me. Every surface Stephanie touched, every convenience she enjoyed existed because of the very work she found so distasteful. The central air keeping her comfortable, my crew had installed it, the security system protecting her jewelry. I'd overseen the wiring. The custom kitchen where she reheated takeout. Peterson Construction had managed that entire renovation. "So what's new this week, Harold?" Stephanie asked, cutting into her ribs like she was performing surgery. "More exciting construction stories?" The mockery in her voice was crystal clear. She knew exactly what buttons to push, how to make my life's work sound trivial and boring. "Actually, yes," I said calmly, wiping sauce off my fingers with the cloth napkin. "Closed the Riverside contract this week. Shopping center renovation, $1.4 million job." Even saying it felt good. 18 months of meetings, proposals, and negotiations had finally paid off. The project would renovate a failing strip mall into a modern shopping center, bringing jobs and commerce back to a struggling neighborhood. It was the kind of work that made a real difference in people's lives. Stephanie's laugh was sharp and ugly, like fingernails on a chalkboard. "Well, that's nice for you. I'm sure that's very fulfilling, working with your hands all day. Bradley and I are focusing on more intellectual pursuits. Intellectual pursuits." This from a woman who'd never worked a day in her life, whose biggest accomplishment was getting 500 likes on an Instagram post about her morning latte. A latte that cost $6 and went on my company credit card every single day. "What kind of intellectual pursuits?" I asked, genuinely curious. Bradley shifted uncomfortably in his chair, suddenly very interested in cutting his meat into precise, even pieces. But Stephanie puffed up like a peacock, ready to perform her favorite fantasy. "Bradley's transitioning into tech entrepreneurship," she said, her voice taking on that tone she used when she was trying to impress people. "We're developing innovative digital solutions, much more sophisticated than construction work." I nearly choked on my ribs. Tech entrepreneurship. Bradley was a decent project manager, good with schedules and client relations, but he couldn't program a coffee maker, let alone start a tech company. The most sophisticated digital solution he'd ever implemented was switching our project management software to a cloud-based system. That's interesting, I said, keeping my voice level. How's that being funded? The question hung in the air like smoke from a job site fire. Stephanie's face flushed red, and Bradley suddenly became very interested in his dinner plate. For a moment, the only sound was the quiet hum of the central air conditioning and the distant tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. The same clock Sarah had insisted on buying when we first started making real money. Well, you know, Stephanie stammered, her confident facade cracking like cheap drywall, investment capital, business loans, the usual, business loans, that was rich. I knew exactly where their investment capital came from because I wrote the checks every month. Property taxes, homeowners insurance, HOA fees, even their car payments, all automatically deducted from Peterson construction accounts. I'd set it up that way 3 years ago, thinking it would be temporary help while they got established. But now, sitting here listening to Stephanie talk about business loans while wearing jewelry that cost more than most people's cars, I realized how naive I'd been. Speaking of money, Bradley finally spoke up, looking nervous as a cat in a thunderstorm. Dad, we need to talk about Wednesday's business dinner. You know, the one where you're catering for my potential partners? I remembered. 2 weeks ago, Bradley had basically ordered me to prepare a full dinner for 6 business associates. Prime rib, lobster, premium wine, the works. Like always, he just assumed Dad would foot the bill because it's for the family business. Never mind that Peterson Construction was my business, built with my sweat and Sarah's sacrifices. Ah yes, I said slowly, setting down my fork. That dinner. The partners are really excited to meet the owner of Peterson Construction. Bradley continued, his voice taking on that pleading tone he'd used as a kid when he wanted something. It'll really help close this deal if they see the family business connection. Family business connection. Funny how it was a family business when he needed my reputation to impress his contacts, but intellectual pursuits when his wife wanted to distance herself from blue-collar work. I thought about all the times over the years when Bradley had introduced me as my dad. He's in construction, said with just enough embarrassment to let people know he wasn't following the same path. Well, I said, standing up and folding my napkin with deliberate care. I'll need to check my schedule and pricing. The words hung in the air like the sound of a nail gun misfiring. Both Bradley and Stephanie looked at me like I'd grown a second head. Stephanie's eyes narrowed. Pricing? Harold, this is for Bradley's career. And Peterson Construction is my career, I replied evenly. I don't work for free, even for family, especially not when that family thinks construction work is beneath them. The room went dead quiet. You could hear the air conditioning humming in the background, the distant sound of a neighbor's lawnmower, the tick of that grandfather clock that had counted down so many family dinners over the years. I excused myself to use the bathroom, walking down the hallway lined with photos from their European vacation, a $15,000 trip paid for with the company credit card I'd given them for emergencies. The pictures showed them sipping wine in Tuscany, touring castles in Scotland, living like royalty on money earned by men in hard hats and steel-toed boots. In the bathroom, I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app. The Peterson Construction business account showed the usual activity, payroll, supplier payments, equipment maintenance, but it was the supplemental accounts that made my jaw clench. There it was, the credit card in Stephanie Peterson's name, linked to my business account for family emergencies. The spending was astronomical. $4,800 at Serenity Spa and Wellness just yesterday, a full day of treatments that cost more than Danny made in a week. $3,200 at some boutique called Urban Elite last Tuesday. $5,500 at Morton's Steakhouse on Friday night, where she'd probably told people her husband was a tech entrepreneur. I scrolled through months of statements, my anger building like pressure in a steam boiler. Designer handbags, luxury cosmetics, premium gym memberships, weekly salon appointments. All charged to Peterson Construction, while she publicly mocked the very work that paid for her lifestyle. But it wasn't just the credit card. I switched to the main business account and started adding up the automatic payments. Property taxes for their house, $3,600 annually. Homeowners insurance, $2,400 annually. HOA fees for their gated community, $800 annually. Car insurance for both vehicles, $3,000 annually. Then there were the services, lawn care, $200 monthly house cleaning, $300 twice monthly. Premium cable and internet, $180 monthly security system, $75 monthly. Even the garbage service, $45 monthly. I did the math in my head, a skill honed by 30 years of calculating material costs and labor hours. Conservative estimate, $35,000 annually in direct support, plus whatever Stephanie charged to the credit card. Over 3 years, I'd poured over $100,000 into maintaining their illusion of success. The worst part was realizing how cleverly they'd hidden it from themselves and everyone else. To their friends, Bradley was a successful businessman and Stephanie was a woman of leisure married to a rising star. To my face, they acted like they were doing me a favor by letting me be part of their lives. But behind my back, I was nothing more than an ATM they accessed with practiced smiles and manufactured gratitude. I'd let this slide for 3 years, telling myself I was helping them get started in life, that Sarah would have wanted me to support our son's family. But sitting there in their expensive bathroom, staring at the evidence of their deception, something fundamental shifted inside me. When something's broken on a job site, you either fix it or you tear it down and start over. This situation was broken beyond repair. But I didn't cancel anything right then. In construction, you plan first, then you execute. You measure twice, cut once. You survey the ground, check the blueprints, calculate your materials. Then, when you're ready, you pour the foundation and start building, or in this case, start tearing down. I washed my hands with their imported Italian soap, straightened my shirt, and walked back to the table with a clear head and a new sense of purpose. They looked relieved when they saw me, like they thought the storm had passed. Poor fools had no idea it was just beginning. "The ribs were delicious, Dad," Bradley said awkwardly, apparently having used my absence to get his story straight. "Thanks for bringing them." "My pleasure, son." I smiled, and for the first time in months, it was genuine. "And Stephanie, you're absolutely right about one thing." She looked surprised, maybe even hopeful. "About what? I'm just an old construction worker, been doing manual labor for 30 years. I paused, letting that sink in like concrete setting in a foundation. "What you might not realize is that this old construction worker built everything you see around you, including your lifestyle." The color drained from her face like water from a broken pipe. "Tomorrow's Monday," I continued, my voice calm and steady as bedrock. "Banking day. I think it's time this old worker reorganized his finances. Maybe focused more on his own retirement instead of funding other people's intellectual pursuits." I gathered up the empty platter and headed for the door, leaving them sitting there in stunned silence. "See you folks later." As I drove home in my F-150, paid for in cash, like everything else I owned, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: control. For too long, I'd been the ATM they came to when they needed money, but ignored when they wanted respect. That was about to change. Monday morning came early, like it always did. I was at the Peterson construction office by 5:30 a.m., going through files in my oak desk, the same desk where I'd signed my first contract 25 years ago and held Sarah's hand the day the doctor called with her test results. The early morning sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the blueprints for the new low-income housing project I'd been pursuing. I called my office manager, Carol, who'd been with me for 15 years. She knew where every dollar went and where every skeleton was buried in Peterson Construction's books. "Carol, I need you to contact First National. Cancel the supplemental credit card ending in 4429. That's Stephanie's card." There was a pause. Carol was smart enough to read between the lines, and she'd witnessed enough of Stephanie's entitled behavior over the years to understand what was happening. "Everything all right, Harold?" she asked carefully. "Just doing some financial housekeeping," I said. "Also call Morrison Property Management. As of today, the utilities and services for 1247 Oak Ridge Drive need to be transferred to the residents' names. No more automatic billing to Peterson Construction." "That's Bradley's address," Carol said, her voice neutral but knowing. "Yes, it is." I pulled out another file, one labeled family expenses, that made for some interesting reading. "One more thing. Property taxes for that address are due next month. Send them a notice that they'll need to handle that payment directly. Peterson Construction is no longer responsible for dependent housing expenses." I hung up and leaned back in my chair, watching my crew arrive through the window. Danny pulled up in his pickup, followed by the younger guys in their work trucks. Good men who'd been with me for years, who understood that honest work was nothing to be ashamed of. They respected what we built together, and more importantly, they respected each other. My phone buzzed around 10 to 45 a.m., a text from Bradley. "Dad, Stephanie's card got declined at Starbucks. Bank says you canceled it. What's going on?" I let him sweat for 30 minutes before responding. "Just reorganizing company finances. Personal expenses should come from personal accounts." The phone rang immediately, Bradley's name flashing on the screen like a warning light. "Dad, what the hell?" His voice was panicked, high-pitched like when he was a teenager caught breaking curfew. "You can't just cut us off without warning. Cut you off," I said calmly, watching Danny's crew unload materials for the day's work. "Son, you're 34 years old with a good job and a college degree I paid for. Time to start paying your own way. But the house payment, the insurance, the lawn service, all of it comes from your accounts. All of it has been coming from Peterson Construction for 3 years. That was supposed to be temporary help while you got established, not a permanent lifestyle subsidy. Stephanie's freaking out. She says this is cruel. I thought about that word, cruel. What was cruel was working 12-hour days to build something meaningful while your family mocked you behind your back. What was cruel was sacrificing your own comfort to fund someone else's luxury while they called you an embarrassment. Cruel would be letting you live in a fantasy forever. I said, I'm doing what I should have done years ago, teaching you responsibility. Dad, please. We can't afford to live without your help. Then maybe Stephanie should spend less time calling me names and more time figuring out how tech entrepreneurs actually make money. I ended the call and went back to work. Around noon, Carol brought me coffee and the updated bank statements. Seeing those automatic payments canceled felt like lifting a steel beam off my shoulders, painful at first, but ultimately freeing. Tuesday brought more calls, more pleading. The internet got shut off when the automatic payment failed. The lawn service stopped coming. The housekeeping service sent a notice about unpaid bills. One by one, the luxuries that defined their lifestyle disappeared like scaffolding coming down at the end of a job. Wednesday arrived at the day of Bradley's big business dinner. At 2 p.m., he showed up at my office looking like he'd aged 5 years in 3 days. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, sweat staining his collar despite the office air conditioning. Dad, I need that dinner tonight. I promised these investors that Peterson Construction would cater it. My whole promotion depends on this deal. I pulled out a folder with Peterson Construction letterhead and slid it across my desk. I'm happy to cater your event. Here's the quote. Bradley's hands shook as he read it. $18,000. Dad, you always did this stuff for free. I always did a lot of things for free. That era just ended. I stood up and walked to the window, watching my crew load equipment for an afternoon job. You want to tell people you're in tech? Fine. But Peterson Construction is a business, not a charity. I don't have $18,000 just lying around. After the credit card got canceled, we had to pay cash for everything. Do you know what groceries cost when you actually have to budget? Welcome to the real world, son. In the construction business, we call this a learning experience. He left without another word, but at 4:30 p.m., Carol told me someone had wired $9,000, half the deposit I'd demanded. I found out later Bradley had sold his Rolex, some golf clubs, and a few other luxury items to come up with the money. The same items he'd bought with money from my business accounts. The dinner went perfectly. Peterson Construction had catered hundreds of events over the years, and we knew how to deliver. Prime rib, grilled lobster, premium wine, everything first class. Bradley's investors were impressed. The deal went through, and he got his promotion. But something fundamental had changed. When I presented him with the final bill at the end of the night, he paid it without complaint or expectation of family discount. 8 months later, I got a call from Bradley. His voice was different, steadier, more mature somehow. Dad, can we talk? All three of us. They came to my house this time, a modest 3-bedroom ranch I'd bought and renovated myself. Real hardwood floors, solid craftsmanship, built to last. Stephanie looked different too. No designer dress, just jeans and a simple blouse. Her hair was pulled back, and she looked tired, but somehow more genuine. Harold, she said, meeting my eyes for the first time in years. I owe you an apology. I gestured for them to sit on the furniture I'd built myself from reclaimed barnwood. These past months have been hell, she continued. I got a job at a real estate office downtown. I stand on my feet all day, deal with difficult clients, work weekends. Last month, I finally made enough commission to cover our rent. She looked down at her hands, hands that showed calluses for the first time since I'd known her. Yesterday, this wealthy client treated me like I was invisible, talked down to me like my work didn't matter. And I realized that's exactly how I treated you. Bradley reached over and took her hand. We've been living in a bubble, Dad, pretending we were something we weren't, using your money to play dress up in a life we never earned. I sat back in my handmade chair and studied them both. They looked humbled, but also healthier, more real. Construction work isn't glamorous, I said finally. It's hard, dirty, and demanding, but it's honest. Every building I've put up will be standing long after I'm gone. That means something. I know that now, Bradley said. I'm sorry I let her disrespect you. I'm sorry I was ashamed of what you built. And I'm sorry I was such a terrible daughter-in-law, Stephanie added. Will you give us another chance? Not financially, we don't want that anymore. Just as family, I looked at these two people who'd finally learned what it meant to earn their way in the world. It had taken some tough love, but they'd figured it out. Family doesn't mean free money, I said. It means respect, support, and honesty. Can you live with that? They both nodded. Last Sunday, they invited me over for dinner at their small apartment. No marble floors or crystal chandeliers, just a simple table, mismatched chairs, and a home-cooked meal Stephanie had made herself. "The meatloaf's a little dry," she said apologetically as she served it. "Tastes perfect to me," I said, and meant it. As I drove home that evening in my trusty F-150, I thought about the lesson I'd learned. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family is stop enabling their worst behaviors. Sometimes being a good father means being the tough guy for a while. They still call me an old construction worker, but now they say it with pride, and that makes all the difference in the world. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone isn't what they want. It's what they need to become the person they're meant to be. I learned that respect isn't inherited or purchased. It's earned one honest day's work at a time, and no amount of money can substitute for the dignity that comes from building something real with your own hands.